Vivian doesn't believe that this could possibly be happening, but her parents become very devout believers in this religion, and that causes this rift between them. And yeah, so I'm just going to read the first chapter of the book, which once you know that, everything will make sense, I think. And then if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. Okay. Just before midnight that night, I stand barefoot in the grass in a borrowed dress, drinking champagne out of a plastic cup and looking at the stars. There's a party going on in the abandoned mansion behind me, organized by my best friend, the indefatigable Harp, the one who loaned me the dress and secured the champagne. It's late March and a little chilly. I can hear Harp shouting over the music inside, trying to get everybody to count down, like tomorrow is just the start of a new year. 10, 9, 8. I know I should be celebrating too, but I don't like the countdown. 7, 6, 5. I think of my parents. I wonder if they're counting down too. I picture them hand in hand in the middle of our street, waiting. 4, 3, 2. In this moment, the one they believe will be their last earthly moment, are they thinking at all of me? 1. Inside there's a whoop, then laughter. Where's Viv? I hear Harp shout. I half turn to go in, to drink and dance with my best friend, both of us vindicated, still alive. But then something black flashes against the moon. It looks enough like a human body that I freeze. I think, this is it. In the 3 years since Pastor Beaton Frick first predicted that the rapture was approaching, I've never once thought he was right. But in this moment, my eyes wide open, my body taut with worry, I know I'm doing what I thought I never would. I'm believing. Then I see the thing again and recognize it to be a bat, darting and swooping in and out of my line of sight, and suddenly Harp's at the front door, saying, Vivian Apple, what the hell? Are you trying to ascend in the middle of my party? And I'm rushing towards her, my cup of champagne sloshing onto my legs, laughing harder than Harp's quip warrants, because I'm trying not to feel the belief still shivering in my bones, like a new, unshakable part of me. I've lived next door to Harpreet Junda all my life, but she'd always seemed a little wild. This was the girl who at 12 pulled out a pack of cigarettes at the bus stop and hacked her way through 4 of them for no apparent reason, while the rest of us looked on in awe. And anyway, I already had friends, good girls like me. But when high school started, nationwide Rapture Watch began to hit its stride. Pastor Frick had already made the prediction that in 3 years, the most devout Church of America congregants would be plucked into heaven, and following that would be 6 months of hell on earth for all that remained, ending in absolute obliteration. It wasn't until a series of catastrophic events in the weeks immediately preceding my freshman year, an earthquake in Chicago that killed hundreds, a massive bomb detonated at a Yankees game, the sudden and unnerving death of the entire American bee population, that people became convinced. My old friends turned believer. They retreated to hidden bunkers with their families. While I made SAT flashcards and waited for the weirdness to blow over, my old friends were getting married and having babies, populating the earth with more soldiers for Christ's army. So by last year, Harp's wildness suddenly resembled sanity more than anything else, and we became an inseparable team, a fiercely non-believing unit of 2. 3 months ago, when her parents finally converted, Harp packed a bag and walked the 2 miles to her brother Raj's apartment in Lawrenceville, where he lives with his boyfriend, Dylan. She's made no secret about wanting me to move in. It'll be like a slumber party, Harp's always saying, one where we have to pool our earnings from our minimum wage jobs to pay the rent that seems to increase each month at the landlord's whim. At Harp's apartment, our main source of entertainment is reading out loud articles from the insipid Church of America magazines for girls, sold now at every drugstore. Spring into the eternal kingdom in this sweet pale gold romper. Only $145 on the Church of America website. This is what we were doing 2 weeks ago when Harp had her idea. We should have a party on Rapture's Eve, she said. You think? I said sarcastically. I'd seen this coming for weeks. In a lot of ways, I'm still getting to know Harp. Our friendship is less than a year old. But if I understand only one thing about her, it's that this girl loves a party. Something classy, Harp continued. Wine, music, I'm talking a bacchanalian orgy. I laughed. Well, that does sound classy. Harp grabbed a notepad from the table beside her bed and started jotting down ideas. We'll get Raj to buy the beer, and then we'll break into one of those abandoned mansions on 5th Avenue in Shadyside. You'll have to scope them out for a few days to see which ones look dead. Just in case you're not keeping track, your plan already involves the breaking of at least 3 laws, I said. And anyway, why Shadyside? Why not have it here? It would be easier for you, Harp shrugged. You could walk there from your house. If my parents let me go. Vivian, Harp frowned at me. You know, and I know, the world isn't ending in 6 months. But let's pretend, for the sake of argument, that it is. And then let's let that hypothetical guide our answer to the question, will we be asking our fundy parents' permission to attend an alcohol-fueled gathering of heathens? You know I don't like lying to them, I said. I don't like sneaking out. I just want it to be 2 weeks from now. I want everything to go back to normal. There's no normal anymore, said Harp. There's never going to be a normal again. So now's probably as good a time as any to start acting like you're the hero of your own story. Yeah, I sighed. Harp's always singing this song. When we first started hanging out last year, she said she'd only deign to be my friend if I quit being the obedient prude she'd spied from her bedroom window. The girl who worked hard for straight A's, flossed daily, set the dining room table. What Harp doesn't understand is that I like my parents, current hiccups and sanity notwithstanding. I like knowing that they like me. That's why I've always been a child they could be proud of. It's why I can't, even now, bring myself to leave their house. Because I don't want to make them unhappy. Because I know if I leave, I'll miss them. They're pod people, Harp said, like she was really sorry about the news she was imparting. There's nothing you can do for them now. They're my parents, I said, like the word was some kind of talisman. Now, in the doorway of the mansion, my best friend pulls me close. She's a full head shorter than me, with that messy, sexy hair I've tried and failed to emulate on my own head. Sometimes I feel too big around her, not quite human. But Harp's not quite human herself. She's a tiny, foul-mouthed, mischief-making elf. Viv, old bean, she says. I'd say this hop of mine is turning into a corker. Ritzy as hell, you old so-and-so, I say. Bee's knees, and how? Okay, let's not push it, says Harp. There's only one problem, as far as I can see, and it's a dire one. What? I gaze around the living room. This afternoon, Harp and I hung winking white Christmas lights along the ceiling, and everyone, friends and strangers alike, looks soft and happy in their glow. It's my friend Vivian, she says, her expression grave. She's avoiding a good time like it's a new strand of bird flu. Even though she looks straight up banging this evening, she's standing out in the yard when there are perfectly cute boys she could be in here talking to. I'm not going to risk getting Magdalene, thank you, I tell her. While I recognize a few of our non-believer classmates milling around, there are plenty of people I don't know. And Harp knows as well as I do that you should never talk to boys you don't know. It's rumored that the Church of America regularly sends out its best-looking adolescent males to tempt girls into falling, confront them into weepy contrition, and then bring them in for full-on conversion. But Harp won't accept this excuse. Remember that game we played a couple weeks ago? Let's pretend it's the last normal night of the rest of the world. The 4 horsemen are en route. Isn't there even one dude in this room you'd want to bone before the locusts start falling? To humor her, I look around, bypassing the guys I know to be partnered or jerks or gay. But then the crowd parts and I see him. He's on the steps in the foyer. I don't know him, but I'm sure he's not a spy. He's around our age, good looking, but not in the way those church boys always are, golden haired and square jawed. This boy has long fingers and soft, messy brown hair. He wears black framed glasses and uses the same tricks I do for blending into a crowd. He keeps his red plastic cup close to his mouth so he can drink from it to keep from talking. And he's found something in this abandoned house to read. Who's that, I ask. I'm not sure Harp has even registered who I'm talking about before she takes me by the elbow and steers me into the foyer. We stand in front of him until he looks up, and when he does, I feel a flare of something like excitement or fear. I might just be a little drunk, but this boy's eyes are the bluest things I have ever seen. I'm Harp, my best friend says, businesslike. This is Viv. Personally, I think you guys would make really cute babies together. She's gone before I've even grown. The boy looks a little stunned, but he shifts on the step to make room for me. "I'm Peter," he says as I sit. For a while, we gaze in different directions. Peter seems to be watching the dancers, and I'm trying to think of something to say, something that reveals my charm and my wit, the multitudes I contain, but I've got nothing. Over a minute has passed before I manage to ask, "Do you live in Pittsburgh?" "I don't," he says. He doesn't say where he lives. He doesn't say anything. In the church magazines, they're always trying to convince you that boys who don't talk to you are just shy, that the shyness of boys is a virtue. Signs that he is the one. He doesn't text you back. A boy who doesn't text you is a boy actively trying to resist temptation, a boy destined for paradise. Bind yourself to him in holy matrimony. "So you're dead," I say. "What?" Peter turns to me, his expression wary, like he's just realized I'm crazy. His eyes are so blue. I worry if I drink too much champagne, I'll start expounding to him on the subject of his eyes and their blueness. "You said you don't live in Pittsburgh, and yet here you are. The logical conclusion is that you're a ghost, or," Peter starts to smile as I continue, "or you're a reanimated corpse. That's part of the prophecy of the rapture, right? The dead will rise and crash our parties." He laughs. "Do you really think that's a priority for the reanimated corpses?" "Absolutely," I say. "No French onion dip in purgatory." There's this particular way he laughs, a happy surprise in his features, like it's the last thing he expected to be doing. It feels like an accomplishment to have made him laugh. I duck my head and see what he's been reading, a page of a newspaper, yellowed at the edges. In the center is the face of Pastor Beaton Frick. The picture's in black and white, so you can't see the twinkling green of his eyes or how tan his skin is from years of Florida living. But you can see the distinguished gray flecks at his temples, the movie star cleft in his chin, the thick white line of his smile. Sometimes I wonder if the church would have taken off as quickly as it did if Frick had been some crotchety-looking old guy with hair coming out of his ears. "Why do you have that?" I ask. Peter hands the paper to me. It's dated 3.5 years ago, and under the picture of Frick is a jokey headline. "Uh-oh, the rapture's a go." The kind that everyone used at first, before the church got powerful and its congregants began boycotting the lamestream media, claiming religious persecution. "It was upstairs in one of the bedrooms, framed," Peter says. I don't know what that says about the people who used to live here. I skim the article. It has the usual descriptions of Frick's strong handshake, his toothy grin, the vertical line that forms in his brow whenever he expresses a conviction. I see all the words Frick uses when he's explaining exactly who the unsaved are and how they've incurred Christ's wrath: gay, secular, feminism. Usually I look at Frick and see a crazy man. But tonight, through the haze of champagne, I see a man who wants to take my parents away. "I can't wait for this all to blow over," I say. After a moment, Peter asks, "What do you mean?" "You know," I shrug, "after nothing happens, after everyone snaps out of it." That's kind of, Peter speaks carefully, like he wants to be sure he's saying it right. I mean, these people really believe what they believe. But what they believe is so absurd, I laugh. I wait for Peter to laugh too, but he doesn't. He's frowning at me. "What do you believe in?" he asks. I open my mouth, close it again. I've got no ready-made answer to this question. I have a feeling it would take me time, a long time, to articulate whatever it is I would come up with. Peter seems to sense my confusion. Or, okay, let me put it this way. In 3 years, you've never once considered it possible that the world as we know it is about to end? I want to tell him that I have, that not half an hour ago, for a fraction of a second, I believed. I want to entrust him with this secret. I want to tell him how there was a kind of relief in it, a close and secret sense of safety, like I was falling, yes, but into some kind of a net. But will that sound stupid? Won't these contradictions make me seem blurrier, less defined? I worry that if he can't see me clearly, he'll forget me easily. And anyway, admitting it feels like tempting fate, like breaking a mirror on purpose. "No," I say. "Why not?" Because if my parents are right, the world will end before I've done anything worth doing, before I've become a person worth knowing. If the world ends, then I end. And I feel like I've barely started. Is this pathetic? Peter looks at me with a flicker of something unidentifiable behind his eyes. He's invested in this conversation in a way I don't totally understand. I want to trust him, to tell him what I really feel, but all of a sudden I get that magazine voice in my head again. It's saying, "Your BF has enough worries without yours to bring him down. A godly woman smiles with the force of 1,000 heavenly suns. Brighten your guy's day in this sweet lemonade frock." So I muster a dazzling, careless grin, like I'm about to tell him another joke, a really, really good one. Because it's a downer, I say. After a moment, Peter laughs, but it's not the same laugh from before. This one's polite and quick. When it's over, he stands. "I'm gonna get something to drink. The kitchen's that way, right?" I nod. I think for a second he might ask me what I want, or suggest that I come with him, but he just says, "Nice talking with you." It's not the first or worst of the many uncomfortable interactions I've had with the opposite sex, but I have a feeling I won't be able to shake it off quickly. I stand on the step and search for Harp's dark brown head in the crowd. She is, as ever, at the center of it. I move in her direction, trying to still the sick flutter in my chest. I know I can do better than this. I know I can be more and better of a person. Since today is not, in fact, the start of the end of the world, I might as well treat it like the start of something good. Like it's a new year after all, a time for making resolutions. As I cross the party, hoping to soak up some of Harp's boundless energy, her endless boldness, I say to myself, "Dear God," and then I scratch that for obvious reasons. "Dear universe," I say, "make me less meek, make me less afraid. Dear universe, make me the hero of my own story." The next morning, I shake Harp awake before I leave to see if she wants to come home with me, but she just pulls a pillow over her head and mumbles goodbye. I walk the 2 blocks alone. No cars pass, nobody walks their dogs or waters their gardens. The street my parents and I live on is peaceful in the late morning sun. At my house, the newspaper is wrapped in blue plastic on the front lawn. I pick it up and slip inside. I'd expected them to be waiting, to give me a sermon on the sin in which I've no doubt been reveling. But they're not in the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. I sigh in relief. Maybe they never noticed I was gone. I sit on the couch and open the paper, expecting rapture headlines. But there's no mention on the first page. Just stories about all the usual disasters, tsunamis and tornadoes, terrorist attacks, fast-spreading viruses. I can't make myself focus on the words. All I can think about is how empty the house seems. I feel a little nauseous about it. I stand. "Mom," I call out. "Dad?" No answer. They're out for a walk. They're out to breakfast. It hasn't happened yet, so they're outside somewhere, waiting for it to happen. I sit on the floor. I lie down. I'm lightheaded. I drank too much last night. I should go up to my room where I can sleep it off. I'll wake in the early evening to find my parents peering down at me in the dark. The cold faith in their eyes will have already started to melt away. They will be looking at me with love. "Mom," I say to the ceiling. "Dad?" The silence is like a weight pressing down on me. If I could just get up and go to upstairs. I should call them. They don't always keep their phones on. Their looming salvation has made them weirdly absent-minded. But at the very least, I can leave an ordinary message. "Hi, Mom," I say out loud to practice. "Just seeing what you and Dad are up to today. You guys up for pizza tonight?" I go quiet, like I'm waiting for her response. But all I can hear is the house. I fish my phone from my pocket and dial my mom's number. I bring the phone to my ear. After a moment, I hear a ring, and then, too soon, another. One is in my right ear, coming through the phone, and the other is somewhere in the house above me, my parents' bedroom. It's the most obvious place for them to be, and yet I hadn't thought to look there. I walked into the house, and thought I could feel its emptiness. But isn't it possible that they're still in bed the way they are some weekend mornings, poring over their twin books of Frick, or deep in one of their endless spirals of conversation? There are 2 voices bouncing off each other and conjoining and bouncing again. I pull myself to my feet and walk up the stairs, the dual rings echoing in my ears. I walk down the hall to their closed bedroom door, not worrying yet about the fact that no one is picking up. I am thinking of Hart, asleep on the floor of the mansion. I wish she were here with me. Harp will laugh when I call her tonight, when I tell her what I thought at first, when the house seemed so big and blank. Harp will be hysterical. I am thinking of Harp laughing, so I don't wonder when no one answers my knock on my parents' door, and I'm not jolted upon opening it by the sight of their bed, empty and made. I swear I feel nothing at all, until I happen to glance up at the slanted ceiling above and see the twin holes, rough at the edges, but wide enough to fit their slim bodies, opening like perfect portals into the vast cloudless sky. I see the sun streaming down like spotlights beside their bed, illuminating 2 showers of golden dust, and that's when I feel something tear in me, something important. That's it. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
About how many drafts did Vivian Apple go through before you got the final program?
That's a really good question. I wrote in a really irresponsible way, basically, which is I submitted the first chapter to a contest, and they told me, in a few months we'll get back to you, but like keep working on the book because we might want to read the whole thing. But I just assumed that wouldn't happen, so I wrote maybe like 2 more chapters, and then after about 5 months, they said, can we see the whole thing now? And I said, like, yeah, of course. Just give me 3 weeks. And so I wrote it really, really fast. The first draft happened in about 18 days and was terrible. But it was apparently better than the other things that had been submitted. So they liked it, and they eventually published it. But that first draft happened, and then there were probably about 2 more drafts after that. But it didn't change too much from the initial like structure. It was just sort of filling out the story a little bit more, because when I was writing it super fast, I left a lot of plot holes. So yeah, I'd say about 3 or 4 altogether. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there a particular religion that you drew upon, or?
No, not really. There was a man a few years ago who predicted a rapture was going to happen in a similar way that it happened in this book. And that's kind of where it started. I had read an article about a family that was divided on similar lines, where the kids thought this was ridiculous, but the parents were following him around and giving him money. And the article was like kind of funny. It was about the kids and their reaction, and one of the kids said, like, you know, they don't make me do my homework anymore because they think I'm going to hell. And I thought that was funny, but I also thought it was this really interesting echo of this rift that usually happens at this time, where kids kind of start identifying themselves in opposition to their parents in a lot of ways. So it started there, but I wasn't really reading too much about that religion in particular. I was looking at kind of all different things, and I also wanted, a lot of it's absurd and made up, and I didn't want it to resemble anything too closely because I wasn't trying to call out any specific belief system. It was more this kind of intolerance that I was trying to take aim at. So, yes.
So, what was your inspiration for the trip to America?
It was kind of made up. It's a few different things. I did read a really great book by Lawrence Wright called Going Clear about Scientology. So there are some Scientology vibes in there at times. But it's kind of a bunch of different things thrown together. And a lot of it's just absurd make-believe stuff that I came up with. Yeah.
Can you talk about your editing process a little bit? Are you like a full-on rewriter?
Yeah, I am now. Yeah, I think what I discovered in having to write it really fast was that the way I need to get things done is to just throw everything on the page, even when it's terrible. And it was like really bad. Like it would just be people talking to each other, and they sounded like robots. Like I couldn't get the dialogue to sound like human beings. But for me, it was important to just like write it down. They're gonna sound like robots in the scene. I'll come back later and fix it. So yeah, I'm definitely a person who just needs to get to the end and then go back and edit. And like I said, the final product is not the bones of it are pretty similar to the first thing I wrote, but it was about kind of opening up these, my editor said, like, you know, you introduce this character, but you don't tell us anything about their life, like what if you told us a little bit more? So it was sort of about taking these threads and kind of making them bigger. Yes?
Can you describe your publishing process and experience?
Sure. So it was through the contest, which was run by a British publisher. So it's kind of an unusual way of getting a book published. Usually you would write the book, send it to an agent, hope that the agent likes it, and then the agent would try to sell the book for you. But my process was submitting to this contest, and then they bought the world rights, so they just owned it. And they published it in England first, and then tried to get the rights sold elsewhere, and talked to Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, who's my American publisher, and they liked it and they bought it. And so yeah, it's a little odd because they control it, so they are the ones selling it, so I have nothing to do with it. They just sometimes email me and they're like, we sold it in Brazil. And I'm like, great. Sounds wonderful. But usually you would be in charge of that. You would be the one who's like, let's try to get it to Brazil. I think, I don't know because I'm not doing it. This is the first time I've ever done. But yeah, so it was odd because it came out in England in September 2013. And obviously I don't live in England, so I had no sense of, you know, is it on shelves? Are people reading it? I would just occasionally get tweets from Welsh teenagers who were like, I read it. So that was reassuring. And now it came out here last month, so that's a little bit more normal now. I can see it in bookstores. Oh, there are a few at once. I'll start here.
Why did you change the name? Because I have the British copy and it's Vivian versus the Apocalypse.
Yeah, so Vivian versus the Apocalypse was the name I gave it. And I kind of wasn't crazy about that as a name. Like when I gave it to the publisher, I was like, if you can come up with something better than this, I'd be all for it. But they liked it. But when it sold in America, my American publisher thought that American readers have apocalypse fatigue. Just like the word apocalypse just makes people kind of go like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. And it also brings to mind zombies, which aren't in this book. So if you're here thinking this is a zombie book, you're going to be really disappointed. And so they found Vivian Apple at the End of the World is a sentence about 5 chapters in, at like a very pivotal moment, and they suggested that, and I actually really loved that, so that's why it changed. But it is super confusing for anyone who is aware of the British one. Like people have bought in the American one, and they're like, I can't wait to read this new book you wrote, and I'm like, that's the same book you already read. But I wait until they've actually spent money on it. I need to eat. Yes.
I teach creative writing, and
Yes, I know.
and I get a lot of students who say, I want to go get a Master of Fine Arts degree, and I want to be a writer of young adult literature. Do you consider yourself a writer of young adult, and what advice would you give to somebody who wants to do those two things?
I do consider myself a writer of young adult literature, but also, I mean, I do just because I've written things that have been called young adult literature. Basically, right now I'm just writing stuff, and it tends to be about teenagers, and it tends to be written in a more teenagery voice. I'm not writing like very, I mean, no offense to teenagers, but it's not a very complex narrative. Like the voice is pretty straightforward, and so that tends to, people read it and say like, this is YA, and I say sure. As far as an MFA goes, it's really hard because in my first year I didn't consider myself a YA writer. I was just sort of feeling things out, and then as I was going into my second year, I think that's kind of when I realized that there was something called YA, and it kind of helped me define what I was doing, because I just kept writing these things about teenagers and feeling sort of like I'm handing this into this workshop of serious writers who are writing these stories for adults and like, should I be ashamed of myself? And I thought saying like, this is YA would make them go like, oh, okay, it's a different thing. But it's hard to say because I don't think that, at least in my experience, no one read YA in my program. There was no one there who said like, who had any familiarity with it. So I was being read kind of with a different skill set in mind, I guess. But I think that's probably changing. I would imagine that with the prevalence of YA, there are more programs that are open to it. No? I would hope that one day there would be. I think if a student wanted to go to an MFA program but also write YA in their research, I would say to the people I was talking to, if I write YA, what would people think of that? But I also feel like having been in an MFA program, I don't necessarily think they are necessary to write a book at all. So if someone was really coming up against a wall and saying, I can't find an MFA program that is welcoming me with open arms with my YA novel, I would say just get some people who you like and trust and have them read it and then try to sell it. Yes.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Sal.
It wasn't that long ago that you were in a chair, like our students are in a chair, chairs tonight. So that was a really weird way to put it. That was
I was in a chair like 30 minutes ago.
My question is just about chairs. Could you just talk about if you could give advice to a current college creative writer? I kind of just throw your question down.
That's okay, fine.
I think it's different.
Yeah.
The advice I would give myself is I wish that earlier on, I wish that from the beginning of me writing, I had just written the stuff that I like to read. And I think when I started, I had this idea of what serious writing was, and that's what I was trying to emulate. And I was trying to emulate writers who I didn't even really care that much about. Like, teachers will give you Hemingway, and you're like, oh, I see. I'm supposed to write about shooting lions. and so, like, you end up writing these stories that are not you, and they're about stuff you don't care about. And so it took me like 6 years of writing all the time before I said, like, I can just write about teenagers making jokes. And then once I did that, it was so much fun, and like everything I wrote just came more alive on the page. And so I wish that I had come to that point earlier. That's the only advice that I really kind of feel is necessary, is just write. If you're not reading shooting lion stories, then you shouldn't be writing shooting lion stories. You guys can quote me on that one. Anyone else? Yes.
From what I know, you've created and found a lot of community through online, through I mean, all the various social media that there are there. What is that? And what have you gotten from that? How is that? Not benefiting you, but what have you gotten?
Yeah. I think it's a few different things. I'm on Twitter and Tumblr and other stuff as well. And I think it's kind of, if you can find the right balance of I'm not just on Twitter all day and calling that a writing day, like I'm not just writing pithy things on Twitter and being like, well, I've done my part. It's been very helpful for me in terms of kind of honing in on the voice that I want to write in, which is usually a bit more quippy. But it's also been, on Tumblr particularly, it's kind of a place where I've realized that there is an audience for the things I want to write. And I think kind of anyone who went on these websites could find that audience, if you have a very specific, and I have like feminism, teen girls, like this very like small wheelhouse, but you gravitate to the people somehow through reblogging GIFs of Agent Carter. You find the people who would read those stories, and that's been really helpful to, I don't know, I'll have an idea and I'll be like, you know what, this group of people right here would actually really be into that. And it's kind of helpful to me in the back of my mind to know like there is an audience for any of the weird stuff I feel like throwing on a page. So that's been kind of the big takeaway for me.
Were there people in your life or particular teenagers that you were able to base your characters on, Vivian? And
Vivian and Harp are very much myself and my best friend from high school. And they're different. I mean, they're different in a lot of ways. My parents weren't in a cult. But yeah, I'm usually drawing from some memory of myself as a teenager and kind of building from there and changing a lot. But I have 28 first cousins, and many of them are teen girls. So that's like a helpful test audience to just kind of, I have one of my teen cousins read things and tell me like, no one would say this right now. Like they might have said this in the mid-aughts, but they don't say it anymore, which is really helpful. But yeah, it's usually coming from some kernel of myself at the age of 17 and then building from there. Yes?
Was writing always something you wanted to do, or did you go through phases?
From like second grade to my senior year of high school, I was really convinced I was going to be a great actor. And I was writing at the same time, but I thought of it as just sort of like this fun thing that I'm doing. And then in my senior year of high school, my high school put on a production of The Hobbit with a largely female cast. And I was cast as Thorin Oakenshield, King of the Dwarves. And they put me in a beard and a Viking cap, and I had to speak in an Irish brogue the whole time. And about midway through that experience, I realized, like, I'm not cut out for this. This is a mortifying experience for me. If I was a true actor, I would enjoy this. Because my best friend was playing Bilbo beautifully, and she is an actor, and she was like, this is fun, this is great. And I was like, how are you not curling up in your bed each night weeping? So, and around the same time, I had a teacher who was really supportive of me and would tell me when I handed in papers, like, this is really good, like, you could do this. And so I think that was the point where I was like, I do like telling stories, even if I have to dress up to do them. And maybe I should follow this and see where it goes. So I was always writing, but that was the point where it really like crystallized. Yes?
You talked about writing the stuff that you like to read, so can you talk about the stuff that you like to read?
I would love to. My favorite books are the Harry Potter books, which I feel really strongly about. And so that's like the first time I remember reading and feeling like, this is super fun. Like, I could keep reading. And now I like a lot of different stuff. I really love short stories. My favorite short story writer is Kelly Link, who just had a book come out this week, I think. And she writes just like the most absurd, long, messy, weird stories about mythological creatures, and I'm into all of them. And I read a lot of stuff. I'm right now reading Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, and it's amazing. It's really great. And if you don't have apocalypse fatigue, you should check that. Yes?
One more. How do you write about being a young girl who wants to be their hero of her own story and romance? And the reason I ask that is that I often have students, especially, I often have students where the only question is, will they or won't they get together with X?
Mm-hmm.
How do you resolve, how do you put feminism and love together?
I was very intentionally putting a love story in this to try to write it in a slightly different way from what I had been reading, and not to like call out any other books, but I've been reading a lot of YA that was about love triangles and will she choose this brown-haired boy or this blonde-haired boy? We're like virtually indistinguishable from each other. They were just like nice boys with different colored hair. And that was really frustrating me, and it was always that was her central dilemma. And I'm a person who, I'm married, I have like romance in my life. And so that was part of my vision of this character, was like she has relationships with a lot of different people that she has to negotiate during this very overwhelming time. And it's with her parents, and it's with her best friend, but it's also with this boy who she's starting to have feelings for. And so what was important to me in telling that story was to just not make it the central thing, which it isn't. I consider the central love story of the book to be her best friendship, and her relationship with Hart takes up more pages and has more drama in it, and it's just more of a push and pull, and there's more tension in it. And so yeah, I don't think it's inherently unfeminist to write a romance or to talk about a love story, because I think that, you know, that's just part of the human experience. But I do think that it's hard to, there are a lot of people who do just want that to be the story of teen girls. And for me as a teen girl, my life had so many other things going on. So it's sort of just for me about writing a full portrait of that time. Any other questions?
What are some of your favorite examples of romance in YA?
Ooh. I really love Katniss and Peeta from the Hunger Games. That's probably my favorite one. I think that's a similar thing where it's actually a really brilliant way of showing how there's this really strong, intense female character who's just killing people. And the way that the Capitol in the story tries to frame it is as a love story. Like they don't care about that. They want you to focus on the fact that she has this boyfriend. So I think it's a really clever way of at once having a love story and also kind of calling out people who are like, but tell us about the love story, Team Peeta. So that's probably my favorite one. I'm kind of drawing a blank about other ones right now, but I do love that one. Oh, I also love, I just read We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and I really love that one. It's a really emotional book. That's why we're having this moment. And I liked the love story in that too, which was complicated and had a lot of, and it wasn't also the overwhelming fact of the book.
Yes.
If your book was going to be made into a movie, who would you cast for the role?
That's a great question. That's my favorite question, because I thought about it really hard. The actress Haley Steinfeld, who was in True Grit a few years ago, that's who I picture in my head as Vivian. And for Peter, I would really like Harry Styles from One Direction. It's going to be a really good movie. Yes.
What house would you be in if you went to Hogwarts?
Thank you so much for that. I have taken the official quiz on Pottermore, so I can answer decisively that I am a Ravenclaw. Yeah. Yeah. Any other Harry Potter movies? You guys want to know about my Patronus?
Yeah.
Yes. I don't have an answer. I'm not a witch.
You wrote this pretty quickly, and was there a point where you had to go back and research?
I didn't do a lot of research. I was reading the Scientology book when I was revising, and so I did kind of take not actual details and facts, but sort of just the like mental state that book put me in, and kind of let that sort of guide me. But I was trying to not like go too close to anything that actually existed. So I didn't do any research really. And also that would have slowed me down, and I didn't really have a lot of time. So it was mostly just writing.
Oh,
Yes,
didn't you go on an epic road trip with your husband and that maybe fed into the
I
book?
did, but this is interesting is that it wasn't, I submitted the first chapter, and I also submitted at that time a synopsis. And in the synopsis I said, she's gonna go on a road trip. She's gonna go from Pittsburgh to California. That was just like what I had decided in my head. And then 2 months later, I was living in Pittsburgh at the time. 2 months later, my husband got a job in San Francisco. And he was like, should we fly there or drive? And I was like, well, I am writing this book about a road trip from Pittsburgh to San Francisco. So we took that trip. We don't follow the same route that she ended up following, but it was really helpful. I mean, we stopped at a few different places
I
that,
remember the Facebook book.
yeah, that made their way into the book. And we stopped actually at the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City, and I think that probably kind of fed the book a little bit. But yeah, it did help me in terms of sort of the road trip aspect, just like the exhaustion of being on the road and like the weirdness of being on the road, which is a lot of the book. But yeah, it was a total coincidence that we ended up taking that trip.
You can write it off as a research expense.
But I didn't,
Oh.
because I'm an idiot. Any other questions? Yes.
Who designed your cover?
The cover was designed by the original, the UK publisher. They have a design team there. And the picture is actually just a stock photo that they found and put the title over. And then the US publisher liked it. But yeah, I was really lucky in that they sent me the email that's like, here's your cover, and you don't really get much say in it really, sometimes none at all. And so for it to be this cover that I was blown away by, I was really lucky. I will say that the cover for the sequel in America, they sent me a cover and I hated it, and they were actually really nice about it and changed it, and I like it now. So just demand what you want. Yes.
And about how many books is Vivian Apple gonna get?
Just 2 books. It ends in the sequel. Yes?
So do you think it's easier or harder to write about teenagers than, say, like older people?
That's a good question. For me, it's easier. For me, it's just kind of like what I want to be writing, and so I find it pretty easy. But I think it's sort of just where you're drawn to. I think maybe I'm getting older now, and so perhaps I will start thinking like, I would rather write about this person getting a mortgage. But I'm not at that point yet. I'm still just more interested in the teenage experience. One thing that's really nice about writing about teenagers is that when you're a teenager, everything kind of becomes heightened in drama. Like any small thing does feel sort of like life or death. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. And that's just kind of a rich place to be writing from when emotions are running that high. And you can also sort of risk a level of hard on your sleeve kind of sincerity that I think in adult writing we sort of shy away from. I mean, I think if Jonathan Franzen wrote a book where like people were just spewing out their feelings, people would be like, what is this? But you can kind of do that in young adult, and sometimes do it in a very well-written way. So it's a fun place to write, I think. Any other questions? Okay.
No.
Yes.
You plan on concentrating more in the short story format in the future, or the novel, or?
I would love to write. I love writing short stories, and I have a few and would like to keep writing them. So I would like to, at some point, put out a collection of short stories. Right now I'm writing another novel, and then I have another novel after that I'm already thinking about. So probably not for a little while. Also, it's much harder to sell short stories and make any money off of them, and I'm trying to eat again. Yes.
Mine was silly, so if someone else has like a real question.
I don't know that anyone does.
I just wanted to know what your Patronus would be.
I don't know. I haven't thought about this. I said that too soon. I should have put more thought into it before I offered it up.
Failures of Harry Potter.
Let's say it would be a fox. I made it sense.
What do you thought, what?
Patronuses. Don't worry about it.
That's fine, Kathy.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Whenever you are writing it, because you had to write it in such a quick fashion, did you ever, like, just get on a rant of one thing and completely deter from what you originally thought?
That was pretty much every day of this process. But I couldn't have written it as fast as I did if I hadn't had the synopsis also. So when I realized like I have to write this really fast, I did have basically a map that said, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. And so every day was kind of like, all right, as bad as this is going to be, Vivian needs to talk to this person in this scene, and then she needs to get this information, and then she needs to go over here. And so it kind of didn't leave me, I had enough of a map that it left, kind of kept me on the track I had to be on, and every day I would write that scene and then move on to the next one. So it was pretty easy. Right now, in the book I'm writing now, I don't have a deadline, and I'm just writing 20-page meal scenes, so that's hard, but fascinating. Any other questions? Okay. Fake out in the front row. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and for having me. And I think I am signing books if you want them. So.